October 30th, 1950, under the dark skies of Unsan, North Korea, chaos erupts as Chinese forces launch a massive assault. Amidst the gunfire, Corporal Ted Rubin stands alone, manning a machine gun for 24 relentless hours. But this isn't just any soldier. Rubin, a Holocaust survivor, is about to face yet another harrowing ordeal. Captured and wounded, his captors have no idea that this prisoner will bring them an unimaginable level of hell.
Early life in Hungary. Rubin was born on June 18, 1929, in Pashto, a small town in Hungary where 120 Jewish families lived. He was one of 6 children from his father, Ferenc Rubin, who was a shoemaker, and his mother, in addition to siblings from his father's other marriages. When Tibor, also known as Rubin, was just 13 years old, his father, Ferenc, and his stepmother, Rosa, tried to send him to safety in Switzerland, which was neutral at the time. Unfortunately, Tibor was caught and sent to the Mauthausen concentration camp in Austria. On May 5, 1945, American soldiers arrived and freed the camp. Tragically, both of Tibor's parents and a sister were killed during the Holocaust. Later, Tibor said that if he survived and made it to America, he wanted to become a soldier. Despite his struggles with English and even cheating on a test to join, he eventually did become a GI Joe. He was assigned to an infantry unit sent to Korea, where he faced harsh treatment from a sergeant who held anti-Semitic views. This sergeant made derogatory remarks about Tibor's Jewish background and assigned him to dangerous tasks, including defending a hill alone while covering his unit's retreat. Rubin was eventually captured and injured in battle. Drawing on his experiences in Mauthausen, he did everything he could to help his fellow soldiers, scavenging for food and medicine, picking lice off them, and even carrying them to the latrine. A fellow prisoner, Leo Cormier Jr., remembered Rubin's actions, saying, "He did many good deeds," which he explained were mitzvahs in Jewish tradition. He was very religious, and helping others was what mattered most to him.
All around managed to help his fellow soldiers.
The impact of World War II. Tibor Ted. Rubin knows what it's like to slowly starve, to feel like crawling and itching on your skin, and to struggle with the choice between giving up and fighting to survive. At just 13, Rubin faced the worst of despair when he was sent to the Mauthausen concentration camp during World War II. As a Hungarian Jew, he experienced unimaginable suffering under the Nazis. Despite the terrible conditions, Rubin survived. After the war, he moved to New York and later joined the same army that had rescued him from his nightmarish ordeal. From the depths of Holocaust horrors emerged a courage few can match. Rubin went on to fight in the Korean War, where he was captured by the Chinese. In the harsh winter of 1950 to 1951, as his fellow prisoners were dying at a rate of 40 a day, Rubin's bravery stood out. He inspired and gave hope to his fellow captives, showing incredible strength and leadership in the face of dire circumstances. For Rubin, being a prisoner under the Nazis and the Chinese is like comparing night and day. He remembers his Chinese captors as human and somewhat merciful, but the Nazis were a different story altogether. Rubin is still shocked by their brutality. As a young boy, he lost his parents and 2 little sisters to the Nazis' cruelty. He recalls, "In Mauthausen, they told us right from the start that no Jew would ever leave alive. Each day, many people were killed, and bodies piled up to unknown heights. They had nothing to look forward to except death. It was a nightmare, like something out of a horror movie." On May 5, 1945, American soldiers came to free the prisoners. For Rubin, that day is still like a miracle, forever remaining in his memory. The American soldiers showed us great kindness. Despite our filth, our stench, and our diseases, they picked us up and helped us recover. That day, Rubin made a promise he had kept many times over. "I vowed to go to the United States and join the army to show my gratitude," he said. 3 years later, he arrived in New York. 2 years after that, after passing an English language test with a lot of help, he joined the army. He was sent to the 29th Infantry Regiment in Okinawa. When the Korean War began, his company commander told him, "The 29th Infantry Regiment is mobilizing. You're not a US citizen, so we can't keep you. Many of us might die. We'll send you to Japan or Germany instead." "But I couldn't just leave my unit for some safe zone," Rubin said. I was with these guys from basic training. Even though I wasn't a citizen yet, America felt like my home. Rubin got his wish and went to Korea. On February 13, 1950, Corporal Ted Rubin was sent to Korea as part of I Company, 3rd Battalion, 8th Cavalry Regiment, 1st Cavalry Division. He saved many soldiers' lives. He gave them the strength to keep going when many didn't survive, said Sergeant Leo Cormier, a fellow prisoner of war. He saved my life when I was close to death. I was just a skeleton. Rubin was nominated for the Medal of Honor 4 times by grateful comrades. Unlike most military awards given for a single heroic act, Rubin earned through bravery that lasted through fierce battles and continued to thrive even when facing death for 2.5 years. People ask, "How did you survive all that?" Rubin said, "I can't explain it, but I figured that no matter what, I probably wasn't going to make it out alive." Corporal Rubin's dedication and sense of duty are clearly shown in this quote. "I always dreamed of becoming a citizen of the United States, and when that dream finally came true, it was one of the happiest moments of my life. I think about living in the US and feel incredibly fortunate. When I first arrived in America, it was the first time I truly felt free. That feeling of freedom is why I decided to join the US Army. I wanted to show my gratitude." Rubin was awarded the Prisoner of War Medal after spending 30 months as a POW in North Korea, and he received 2 Purple Hearts for his service. The heroic stand at Unsan. At the end of October 1950, thousands of Chinese soldiers were lying in wait. They were experts at hiding and camouflaging themselves with the surroundings. They even started fires to create smoke, which helped conceal their movements. When the soldiers of the 8th Cavalry Regiment were caught in an exposed position, the Chinese troops attacked in full force. Rubin, who was a corporal in the 3rd Battalion of the 8th Cavalry Regiment at the time, described the situation. "It was like the whole mountain exploded." On October 30th, the 3rd Battalion's firepower had been reduced to just 1 machine gun, which had already claimed the lives of 3 soldiers who had been operating it. By the time Rubin took over the machine gun, most of his comrades felt hopeless and lost in the chaos of battle. Nobody wanted to take over, but someone had to. "We had nothing else left to fight with," Rubin said. His fellow soldiers remember him as a hero, bravely defending his unit against the overwhelming number of Chinese troops. The battle around Unsan lasted 3 intense days, during which the Chinese forces pushed the soldiers south. Those who survived had to retreat with barely any ammunition, and many were badly wounded. Over 1,000 men from the 8th Cavalry were reported missing after the fight, but some managed to make their way back to friendly forces or were rescued by tank patrols in the weeks that followed. Earlier in the war, as the 8th Cavalry Regiment advanced towards the Pusan perimeter, Rubin stayed behind to fend off North Koreans, who were constantly attacking his battalion. One morning at 4 a.m., while he was alone defending a hill, Rubin heard the sounds of gunfire from what seemed like hundreds of enemy soldiers. "I thought I was done for," he recalled. "But I kept moving from one foxhole to another, tossing grenades to make the North Koreans believe they were up against more than one person." He admitted that in such a desperate situation, it was hard to think clearly, and he was overwhelmed with fear while trying to save his life. He held back the enemy forces, which allowed the Allied troops and their equipment to safely retreat along the Taegu-Pusan road. This not only resulted in heavy losses for the enemy, but also slowed the North Korean advance on that route. This action saved many American lives and gave the 8th Cavalry valuable time to regroup further south, wrote CPR Leonard Ham in his recommendation of Rubin for the Medal of Honor. Later, when Ham himself was injured, Rubin risked his own life to save him, even when the first sergeant ordered that Ham be left behind. Rubin said, "We didn't know if he was dead. All I could think about was that someone back home was waiting for him to come back." Rubin was under heavy fire from snipers and had to crawl several hundred yards to rescue Ham, who was so covered in shrapnel that he could barely move. "Rubin not only saved my life by carrying me to safety, but he also kept the North Korean snipers from attacking us," Ham said. After the battle in Unsan ended, hundreds of soldiers were captured by the Chinese and forced to march to a camp now called Death Valley. They were poorly dressed for the freezing winter, and many were already worn out and hungry. As a result, a lot of them fell ill with diseases like dysentery, pneumonia, or hepatitis, and some even died. It was so cold that no one wanted to move, and the food we got was barely enough to keep us going, said Sergeant Richard A. Whalen. But Rubin was a huge help, lifting our spirits when everyone felt terrible. Rubin had spent years in a Nazi concentration camp, where he learned survival skills that most people never have to use. He knew how to make soup from grass, which weeds had healing properties, and that a strong mind could help the body overcome great challenges. Rubin understood that his fellow soldiers needed hope to keep going and fight for their lives. Some of the soldiers gave up, and others prayed to be taken away, Rubin recalls. He gave motivational speeches to keep their spirits up, reminding them of their families waiting for their safe return. He even stole food to ensure they had something to eat, urged them to get rid of the persistent lice, and took care of them when they were sick. Cormier recalls, "He went above and beyond to help us survive. I once saw him spend an entire night removing lice from a soldier who was too weak to lift his head. What kind of man does that? I would have told him to just soak in cold water to get rid of the lice. But Ted did things for his fellow soldiers that made him a hero in my eyes." Rubin believed that the best way to fight his captors was to strike them where it hurt the most, their stomachs. Rubin explained, "We had just as little food as they did. One potato would have been incredibly valuable if any of us had it to share. So, when darkness fell, he stole corn, millet, and barley. When the Chinese started a victory garden, he sneaked past armed guards to gather radishes, green onions, and cucumbers, stuffing them into his pants." Cormier added, "The Chinese would have killed Ted if they caught him stealing. Astonishingly, they never did catch him. What he did for us could have cost him his life." Rubin volunteered to join his unit in Korea, which turned out to be a great benefit for many soldiers who served with him. Cormier, who saw Rubin go above and beyond for his fellow soldiers, said, "I owe him a lot." Whalen also considered himself lucky because he was assigned to Death Valley with Rubin. "This was the best break I could have hoped for," Whalen said. "He and I went through that valley together and were assigned to the same house. Without him, I don't think I'd be here today." The same can be said about Corporal James E. Bourgeois. Rubin took care of Bourgeois by cleaning his wounds and wrapping them with snow that had been boiled. Bourgeois explained, "My wounds got so badly infected that Rubin had to use maggots to stop gangrene from setting in. I truly believe that this not only saved my left arm, which I can still use today, but also saved my life." During their time as prisoners of war, Rubin and Cormier became close friends. They were placed in the same bunk area, where they had to sleep on mud floors with hundreds of other men in small rooms. When Cormier became very ill with dysentery, Rubin stayed by his side and cared for him. Other prisoners say Rubin saved more than 40 soldiers' lives during their captivity, first in Death Valley and later at Camp 5 in Pyeongtaong, where about 1,600 U.S. soldiers died in early 1951. Rubin was eventually deported home as part of Operation Little Switch, which was the first exchange of sick and wounded prisoners, occurring from April 20th to May 3rd, 1953. Life in Mauthausen and loss of family. Rubin survived 14 months in the Mauthausen concentration camp in Austria. After being freed by the U.S. Army, he feels deeply grateful to the medics who helped save the lives of those who survived. Rubin reflects, "I'm thankful to God for bringing me to the United States." His family has a strong history of military service. His father, Ferenc, served in the Hungarian army during World War I and became a hero. He was captured and held as a prisoner of war in Russia for more than 6 years. Later in World War II, Ferenc was moved to Auschwitz and then to Buchenwald, where he passed away. Rubin's uncle was also a prisoner of war. His mother, Rosa, and his 10-year-old sister, Ilanya, were tragically killed in a gas chamber at Auschwitz. Rubin's older brother, Mike Lisak, fought alongside the English and Czech forces during World War II. Before joining the army, Rubin worked as a butcher. After being injured in the war, he could no longer continue as a butcher, so he became a clerk and later a manager at a liquor store owned by his brother, Emery, in Rubin. Emery had also survived a concentration camp and later made Ted a business partner at the liquor store. Rubin became a U.S. citizen sometime between 1953 and 1954, though the exact date is not known. He had 2 children with his wife Yvonne. His son Frank served 4 years in the U.S. Air Force and now works at the Veterans Administration in Long Beach, California. Rubin's daughter Rosalind is a school teacher. Rubin traveled extensively around the world. He visited Turkey to see his former POW friends and traveled to countries including Israel, Italy, Germany, Czechoslovakia, Holland, Belgium, Denmark, England, France, Austria, Mexico, Sweden, and Norway. He enjoyed reading, chatting with people, playing soccer, chess, and ping pong, and even competed as an amateur boxer in Germany when he was younger. When people praised Rubin for his bravery, he would quickly brush off the compliments. He believed his actions were driven more by his promise to serve than by any sense of heroism. "The true heroes are those who never returned," Rubin explained. "I was just fortunate." He felt that the Medal of Honor he received should be shared with all the prisoners of war and those who died fighting in the wars. Rubin also remembered the Jewish people who died in vain and the American soldiers who survived and carried on. He dedicated the best years of his life to honoring their memory, becoming a celebrated American war hero and a soldier known for his extraordinary courage. Congressional Review. The Patriot Act was created as a reaction to the September 11 attacks on the World Trade Center in New York City and the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia, as well as the 2001 anthrax attacks. Its main goal was to significantly boost national security. On October 23, 2001, U.S. Representative Jim Sensenbrenner introduced a bill, H.R. 3162, which combined ideas from earlier House and Senate bills. The next day, the House approved the act with a vote of 357 to 66. Most of the no votes came from Democrats, and only 3 Republicans, Robert Ney, Butch Otter, and Ron Paul, voted against it. On October 25th, the Senate passed the act with a vote of 98 to 1, with Russ Feingold as the only no vote. It's common for more conservative policies to gain support after terrorist attacks because they promise stronger security. In this case, the Patriot Act's emphasis on increased security aligned with public concerns about safety after the attacks. President George Bush signed the act into law on October 26, 2001. The Patriot Act has faced criticism for various reasons. Critics argue it allows for indefinite detention of immigrants, allows police to search homes and businesses without consent in certain situations, and lets the FBI access phone, email, and financial records without a court order. Some also criticize it for giving law enforcement broad access to business records, including library and financial documents. Since its passage, parts of the act have been challenged in court, with some provisions deemed unconstitutional. Many parts of the act were set to expire on December 31, 2005. Before this date, supporters tried to make these parts permanent, while opponents sought to amend them to better protect civil liberties. In July 2005, the Senate passed a revised version of the act with significant changes, while the House kept much of the original language. The final bill, which retained most of the original text, passed Congress on March 2, 2006, and was signed by President Bush on March 9th and 10th. On May 11, 2012, President Barack Obama signed the Patriot Sunsets Extension Act of 2011, extending key provisions of the act for 4 more years. This included roving wiretaps, searches of business records, and surveillance of individuals suspected of terrorism but not linked to terrorist groups. However, some parts of the act expired on June 1, 2015, when Congress failed to renew them. The USA Freedom Act, which became law on June 2, 2015, renewed these sections until 2019, but made changes, such as ending the NSA's bulk phone data collection program. Instead, phone companies would keep the data, and the NSA would need a federal search warrant to access information about specific individuals. In November 2019, the renewal of the Patriot Act was included in a temporary government funding bill. The expired provisions needed renewal by March 15, 2020, but Congress could not pass the legislation before recess. As a result, the Patriot Act was split into 2 separate measures to clarify its status. The Patriot Act has sparked much debate. Critics argue that it was rushed through Congress after September 11th with little discussion, and that its size and complexity made it hard to fully understand. Critics like Dahlia Lithwick and Julia Turner found it difficult to gauge the full impact of the act. The act has also been controversial in specific cases. For example, Susan Lindauer, an anti-war activist, was charged under the Patriot Act, but later had the charges dropped. Another case, United States versus Antoine Jones, involved the use of a GPS tracking device without a warrant, leading to a Supreme Court ruling that such practices violated constitutional rights. Organizations like the Electronic Privacy Information Center, EPIC, and the Electronic Frontier Foundation have criticized the act for potentially violating privacy rights. While some, like Professor David D. Cole, acknowledge the act's impact on privacy, but view it as a reasonable response to security needs, others, such as Paul Rosenzweig, argue that the Act's provisions adapt to evolving communication technologies. The Act allows authorities to access voicemail with a search warrant instead of a Title III wiretap order. James Dempsey from the Center for Democracy and Technology, CDT, argues that this bypasses the Fourth Amendment's requirement for notice and the protections of a Title III wiretap. The Electronic Frontier Foundation, EFF, also criticizes this lack of notice, saying it might violate the Fourth Amendment because previously, if the FBI accessed voicemail illegally, it couldn't use that evidence in court. Legal scholar Orrin Kerr believes this rule was odd, stating that under earlier laws, the FBI had to physically invade a person's home to get a voicemail if there was a copy of it there, rather than just accessing the voicemail remotely. Kerr thinks the USA Patriot Act's changes made more sense and were a better solution. The Act's expansion of court jurisdiction to allow nationwide search warrants also raised concerns. The EFF worried that agencies might select judges who are more likely to favor law enforcement, making it harder for smaller internet service providers, ISPs, to protect their customers' privacy. They argue that small ISPs might not have the resources to challenge these warrants in distant courts, and only the service provider is usually aware of the warrant, as many are issued without the target being present. Another point of contention was the sneak and peek searches allowed by the USA Patriot Act. Critics, including EPIC and the ACLU, condemned these searches as violations of the Fourth Amendment, with the ACLU even calling for the law to be repealed. In 2004, the FBI used this provision to secretly search the home of Brandon Mayfield, who was wrongly jailed for 2 weeks due to suspicion of involvement in the Madrid train bombings. Although the U.S. government apologized, Mayfield sued, and on September 26, 2007, a judge ruled the law unconstitutional because it was an unreasonable imposition on Mayfield's rights. Laws about supporting terrorism were also controversial. The EFF criticized them for limiting freedom of association, suggesting that if the law had been in place during apartheid, it would have prevented support for the African National Congress, ANC. They worried that humanitarian workers could be restricted from helping in conflict areas or teaching valuable skills to various groups. The Humanitarian Law Project challenged the provision that banned expert advice to terrorists, arguing it was unconstitutionally vague. In 2004, a federal district court agreed, but in 2010, the Supreme Court reversed that decision. National Security Letters, NSLs, used by the FBI to access records without court orders, were another major controversy. The ACLU and others criticized NSLs for bypassing due process. Although internal checks were supposed to prevent misuse, a judge found NSLs unconstitutional because they restricted judicial review. Reports revealed that the FBI had issued many NSLs and collected extensive records from various businesses. The ACLU argued that the lack of a legal process for challenging NSLs made them unconstitutional. Section 215 of the USA Patriot Act, which allows the FBI to obtain materials like books and records for investigations, also faced backlash. While supporters argued that these records were not private, the American Library Association opposed the provision, fearing it would threaten free speech. Librarians began shredding records to avoid compliance. The Connecticut Four, a group of libraries, challenged the government's gag order related to Section 215 in a case known as Doe v. Gonzalez. In 2006, the government dropped the gag order, highlighting concerns about balancing national security with free expression. The Act's immigration provisions, allowing indefinite detention of aliens suspected of terrorism, also drew criticism. Critics argued this violated immigrants' rights and lacked due process, with some fearing it would undermine the U.S.'s international stance on justice and fairness. The USA Patriot Act also impacted Canadians, with British Columbia's Privacy Commissioner concerned that U.S. laws could access Canadians' private information. To counteract this, British Columbia amended its privacy laws, but these only applied to public sector data. Nova Scotia also passed legislation to protect personal information from U.S. data collection. In 2013, revelations about NSA surveillance led Representative Jim Sensenbrenner, who introduced the act, to express concern that the NSA had exceeded its authority. In 2020, efforts to renew the act faced delays and amendments, and as of December 2020, the act had expired. Award ceremony. In 1993, the U.S. Army launched a study to explore if racial bias was affecting who got awarded medals. Later, in 2001, Congress asked the military to look more closely at specific cases, including that of Leonard M. Kravitz. This review uncovered that Rubin faced discrimination due to his religion and should have been awarded the Medal of Honor. In 2005, President George W. Bush awarded Rubin the Medal of Honor at a White House ceremony for his bravery during the Korean War in 1950. The Medal of Honor is the highest military award a president can give. It recognizes extraordinary bravery that goes beyond what anyone could command, showing true heroism. Corporal Rubin demonstrated this by continually risking his life to save others, embodying the very best of military service, and honoring his commitment to give back to the country that had granted him freedom. After his service, Rubin worked in his brother's liquor store in Long Beach, California, and lived in Garden Grove. He was a dedicated volunteer at the Long Beach Veterans Hospital, earning an award for over 20,000 hours of service. On May 10, 2017, the hospital was renamed the Tibor Rubin VA Medical Center in his honor. Rubin's legacy is not just in monuments, but in the lives he touched. Many American families were able to bring their loved ones home safely thanks to his efforts. South Korea, which grew into a free and democratic nation on the foundation of his sacrifice, and a new generation of American soldiers who were inspired by his courage, are all part of his enduring impact. Today, we remember the personal losses Rubin endured, including the death of his family due to horrific events. We admire his resolve to repay his American liberators by following their example, and recall how his selfless actions gave hope and strength to his fellow soldiers. Since Abraham Lincoln established the Medal of Honor, many have praised its significance. Ted's description resonates well, calling it the highest honor of the best country in the world. Today, a grateful America presents this award to a true hero of freedom. Rubin passed away on December 5, 2015, at his home in Garden Grove. He was survived by his wife, Yvonne, and their 2 children, Frank and Rosie. What are your thoughts on Corporal Ted Rubin's legacies? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section.